This time on the Plutopia podcast, John and Scoop discuss Texas' winter storm disaster and its subsequent water and power crisis. John reports in from South Austin, and Scoop joins from rural Bastrop County.
So this is John and Scoop with the Plutopia News Network, doing something a little different today. Typically we bring somebody in for an interview, but today we're just going to do some talking because we just lived through Winter Storm Uri.
I didn't even know we had a name.
Yes, it had a name. The Texas part of that storm was famously pretty terrible, and we were in the middle of it. I suspect we were both luckier than some people, but we can talk about that. But we just want to talk a little bit about what happened and what happened specifically with us, and kind of what happened from what we've been able to gather statewide.
Yeah, I think both of our families were probably more fortunate than many out there in Texas because there have been some deaths, people, treated for hypothermia. It's just a nasty thing out here. I live in a nice brick, well-insulated house, so it got cold, but it didn't get below freezing like a lot of people who live in manufactured housing, which is just a tough place to keep warm under normal conditions.
Yeah, and many houses are built with pipes exposed in various ways so that they can freeze, and of course, frozen pipes will bust in many cases. Our house, the way that it was built, does not really have exposed pipes. That turned out not to be much of a concern for us. We didn't have any pipe issues, any issues of frozen pipes. But as you may have seen in news reports, there were people who had pipes, especially in the attic, that would freeze and burst, and rain water through the ceiling into the house. And those were pretty serious problems, and that I've known this to happen before in Austin and in Texas, which is never prepared for this sort of thing when it hits, because we rarely have temperatures as low as zero, actually rarely below 20 degrees.
Well, the problem, I think, with a lot of the housing issues is impacted by the fact there are building codes in some cities. Where I live, there are no building codes. You can just build whatever the heck you want and hope that it works for you. But that's the way it is in many parts of rural Texas. I'm out in Bastrop County in the forest. And our neighborhood, the houses are all built on slabs. So all of the water pipes, all the piping is in the cement slabs. So that protects most of it. Of course, I had to get out and frantically in 20-degree freezing temperatures wrap the faucets on the outside. That's the one place where people out here have had problems, is if your faucets aren't insulated or protected in some way, it can migrate that cold into your piping, and that's something you don't want to have happen, especially if you're on a slab, because I experienced a problem with water overflow during the summer that we thought initially was a water break in the slab. And if that had happened, they would have had to bring in, jackhammers and tear up my flooring. Well, they already had to do that, but fortunately that wasn't the case. But the guy that came out from the plumbing company explained that that's a really nasty thing to repair, because basically they can't replace the piping. They have to run smaller pipe, or it's not pipe anymore, it's plastic or PVC tubing. They have to run a smaller one into the pipe to basically, make a new water channel and cut out the one part that has been leaking. And he explained the cost of that. And I could have gotten a good Mercedes probably for what it would have cost to replace all the piping. So
Well,
you pull it
actually, I
back.
mean, speaking of piping, there is a kind of pipe called PEX. And PEX pipe is less rigid than copper or PVC. It's more flexible. It has at least a small margin of expansion. So it is more potentially resistant to bursting when the water freezes. And many of the more recently constructed homes have PEX pipe.
Yeah, I believe that's probably what's been installed in most of the houses out here. There were still some people, some unfortunate folks who did have water problems. So the big problem was it not so much in their house, but where the water meter enters there is at the edge of their property. That's from Aqua Water, a fine establishment. They have not very deep burial on their piping. They just figured it's good, it'll reach there. So that's where a lot of the frozen pipes occurred, was in the connection between the water meter and the house. And when that happens, you have to cut off the meter, hopefully, if it's still working. A number of people had the meters uh, spring a leak and, and explode. When that happens, you're in big trouble.
Yeah, the major water problem that happened here in Austin, and I think similar problems happened statewide, was that there were so many leaks and busted water mains and so forth that all of the water leaked out of the reservoirs, which meant the pressure dropped significantly, and eventually they had to cut everybody off and work at repairing all the water mains and all of the water leaks to try to build the pressure back up and refill the reservoirs. And that took, I guess, 3 days
Yeah.
at least. Today is the day that water started coming back for many people. We got our water back today and water pressure back. We're still under a boil water notice because they haven't been able to test the water yet. That's probably another 24 hours. But the water department here did what I thought was a pretty great job of managing the problem, handling the problem. Whether they could have prevented it, I'm less sure. We do know that the statewide power outages were likely preventable and were primarily caused by a lack of sufficient weatherization, or really any weatherization or winterization, really, of uh, parts of the power system, which is fed by wind energy, nuclear energy, and primarily by gas, natural gas
Yeah, there's a little
energy.
solar. I mean, solar and a little coal, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, and
And
the wind,
the
the
root
wind.
cause is the lack of regulation. I mean, it's a free for all market as far as electricity goes, and
Well,
has
that's
been since
certainly.
the '60s, really.
Do you really understand that? So I know that there's two issues here. One is the fact that even though they knew from storms past that they needed uh, to weatherize equipment and weatherize the lines to prevent outages in this kind of weather, and they didn't do that, even though they were. I think 2011 was the last big storm like this, and there were outages then, not as bad as this time, but they still had outages, and they were told very clearly that they should address that problem, and it never happened.
Yeah, once
So,
again, in true Texas fashion, it was not a requirement. It was a suggestion. It's kind of like the Pirates Code. It's not really rules. It's just a guideline. So, like good
well, this and
parents,
this is
they
partly
ignored it.
this is partly or maybe primarily attributable to the fact that Texas does not want to be subject to federal regulations. Therefore, unlike any other state in the union, has its own um, electrical grid that is self-contained within the state and operated by a nonprofit called ERCOT. And ERCOT sort of manages that, and the Public Utility Commission establishes the regulations. And as you said, they're somewhat deregulated. Um, and when the winterization or weatherization recommendation was made, I think the feds looked at it and said, you really need to do this. And the electrical grids for all the rest of the country, there's two other electrical grids, one for the west side of the country and one for the east side of the country. And they are uh, required by federal regulation to have the kind of weatherization that would have protected our grid. But we have no such requirement because we're not subject to any federal requirements because we're self-contained within the state.
Yeah, and the grid was set up with just that intention of avoiding federal regulation. That's why it's separate, because the political powers, when these various electrical utilities were created, decided if they had to go by federal regulations, they wouldn't be nearly as profitable and they wouldn't be able to do whatever they damn well pleased. And that worked for certain parts of the Texas economy. If you had, well, other than Enron, who played a little too fast and loose with the electrical grid, uh, most of the utilities have done really well. If you can take a look at your utility bill, it's it's not cheap. I was blown away when I moved here from the Bay Area, where they had well-established utilities, and they weren't exactly the good guys either. But I got my first electrical bill and my first water bill, and I went, "Holy crap! What are these guys? Are they putting gold into our water that we didn't realize?" They were big compared to Bay Area utility bills.
So the deregulation of electricity in Texas was actually um, approved by a Senate bill, Senate Bill 7, in January of 2002. And they created something called the Electric Utility Restructuring Legislative Oversight Committee, and they oversaw the implementation of the bill. And one thing was that they created competition, like utility competition. Um, and there are among energy providers in Texas, there are some that are called, I guess, variable rate providers, where
Mm-hmm.
the rate floats with the cost of fuel. And in cases where people are getting their energy from one of those providers, they're looking at electrical bills that could be as much as $10,000 for the month.
Yeah, that my grandson, who's a programmer working up in Dallas, has that kind of electrical utility agreement, and he and his wife were just really freaked out on Facebook yesterday about hearing about people who already were receiving $1,000, $2,000 utility bills, and even getting notices from some of these companies saying, you should probably leave because you can't afford our electricity. And that's amazing. That
Yeah,
I
that's
heard
what
that.
Gritty was telling its customers.
Yeah, it's come on, people. I mean, these people knew what they were going to be doing to these customers, and you would think they have made some adjustments for a disaster, but nope. When you're in big business, you're in it to keep, and they're keeping every nickel they can charge.
So we should talk about the storm. The storm blew in here in the Austin area on Monday night, or it was the middle of the night on Monday. Had almost given up on whether we were going to have any snow or not because it kept not starting when they predicted that it would start, but they kept saying, "Well, it's going to be later, going to be later." When it actually did start snowing here, um, that was like it was in the early morning hours. I think I was up at 2 a.m. and walked to a window to see what was happening, and it was coming down pretty hard, snow.
Yeah, in this area, it started on Sunday and got pretty intense over the night. I was up until about 2 or 3 in the morning, and that's when we lost electricity. And that's when I realized this is not going to be your normal old snow day.
Yeah, actually, when I said Monday, it was Monday 2 a.m. Yeah, it was. So really, it did start Sunday, and I think that on Sunday we had sleet.
Yeah, that was the precursor of the actual snowstorm.
So we were pretty well iced over, and the roads were impassable for many people unless you had like a 4-wheel drive. Extremely dangerous to drive.
Yeah, even
Uh,
the four-wheel drive, a number of people out here had serious problems with that because just because you have four-wheel drive doesn't mean you're not going to slide sideways. I mean,
exactly.
there's no compensation for that. And once you're going sideways, all the rules of inertia kick in, and you're along for the ride.
So, um, did you get out? Did you drive around?
Not until day before yesterday, when I went out and finally made I was going to go to the local HEB for groceries for you know staple items that we really needed, and the line was stretched almost completely around the building. It's like, no, I don't think so. But I did go to Specs Liquors, which is another staple around here. I like my wine, and we had consumed the last bottle of wine, so I went there, and those people were just giddy with pleasure because they were finally open after being closed for a week. And as I said on Facebook, the manager said, "Okay, everyone, he's back. We all of our kids can go to college after all," because I tend to overspend.
Well,
But
if you've got enough booze, that can make up for the lack of food or water or anything else that you might not have.
yes, it doesn't make you warmer, but it basically makes you not give a
Not
crap
care.
about being cold. It's like, am I cold? Oh, I guess I am. My uh, limbs are frozen, but your belly is still warm. I don't know if it's actually warm or you're just hallucinating that you're warming up inside.
Yeah, our power went out on Monday. We had power for much longer than some people in the area, but eventually it was out, and we enlisted our son-in-law, who has a 4-wheel drive truck, to carry us to our son's house where we spent the night. So we were, and our son had electricity. I don't think his power ever went out. So we did have a reasonably warm place to sleep that night. And then we came back here when our power resumed, which was really about 1:30 a.m. Tuesday morning. We had power again, and we've had power since then. But we were keeping the heat turned way down, kept it pretty chilly within the house because we didn't want to use much power, and lights off and all of that stuff. And then our other members of the family came over here because they didn't have power and we did. We had our daughter here and her husband, my son-in-law, and her daughter was here. So we had a house full of people, and we're kind of hanging out. We actually had a pretty good time. I mean, we'll probably have fond memories of our snow day, which stretched out for more than one day. And I guess it was Wednesday morning. My son-in-law and I went out in search of food and various other staples. And someone told us we got a call that said that Target was open, so we went to Target. The power, I think, had gone out at Target, and I believe they were running on a generator. They certainly were not completely lit within the store, and they were letting people come in and just kind of get what they could. But notice that the the frozen foods were all taped off because they had lost power to the freezers, and they couldn't really sell the frozen foods because they hadn't actually been frozen for some
I bet
period
they
of
took a
time.
big write-off on those because
Oh
they
yeah,
usually have a
absolutely.
lot of frozen product.
And we left there and went to Sam's. Of course, it was bitter cold and it was snowing pretty heavily. And we got to Sam's and there was a line uh, with some hundreds of people in it. And the farther we went along the line, the longer I saw the line was, the less I wanted to stand in that line,
Yeah, I saw some of
especially
the
as cold
news
as it
footage of
was.
that, and it was insane. And some of these people, I really felt for them because they were desperate enough to risk frostbite and death standing in line at Sam's or, yeah, a lot of the HEBs were that way. Central Market was that way.
Yeah, it sort of amazed me that people would do that, but we didn't. We left.
Yeah, desperation is a big motivator.
And we traveled around trying to find places that were open. We did finally find a liquor store, and that was probably our salvation.
Yeah, well, out here, we've always been in my household pretty much lone wolves. Anyway, we lived, out here just myself and my wife, and we stay at home a lot. We read a lot. I work in the studio. That's my big thing, and I'll go out in pre-COVID times. I'd go out a lot, and we would do interviews out there, and I'd go into Austin for things, but. During COVID, we've been pretty much hermits because we weren't about to go out and risk being exposed to a lot of the anti-maskers here in Bastrop County. There's a lot of those, unfortunately, but it was not a really bad. Yeah, I mean, it was an uncomfortable experience, but Clarissa and I had a grand old time because we get along together. We don't fight, we don't argue unless I do something stupid, and that's self-inflicted wounds there. But we just had a good old time. In fact, I'm editing a video I shot during one of the early periods of extreme cold and extreme non-functioning utilities, and we were just having a grand old time because we still had some brandy and we still had some sherry and some wine, so we were just happy campers. So we went along. Just this wasn't our first barbecue or our first rodeo. We went through a lot of disasters already. We were in Oakland during the Loma Prieta earthquake. I was in an elevator when it struck, and
Oh
and
wow!
Clarissa was in the same building, and it was shaking apart. And we went home, and fortunately, our home had some damage. We had to replace the entire foundation, which was kind of nasty, but it was at least standing somewhat, and we survived that. We survived the 1991 massive Oakland Hills wildfire, which was our first introduction to wildfire, and it was to the point of where we could see the flames over the hill, north of our neighborhood, and we had every vehicle we owned packed up and ready to go. Fortunately, it didn't make it that far, but we had already done what I did this time. We filled the bathtub with water. We put every bucket that we had, we filled with water, and that's what I did this time. Both bathtubs are still brimming with water because that's one of the first things they teach you in disaster prevention or disaster awareness is to save the water, because you can't go too long without water. You may be able to cut back on the food, but you do need water. So that was and plus we had the Bastrop County complex fire in 2011, I believe it was, and that was really scary because it was headed our way. I mean, when you see you know smoke clouds the size of the Himalayas coming up south of you and headed your way, that it's not a normal weekday. So we were prepared because we have been made paranoid by all those past experiences. So if there's a warning, we'll do everything we can to anticipate it. And we were lucky this time.
Yeah, that was one of the worst fires in Texas.
Yeah.
Probably the worst fire that Texas has seen.
Yeah, no, that was scary, and we once again we packed up my truck with all of the, file cabinets that had important papers in it, all the important things like clothing and some survival supplies. But fortunately, didn't make it here. But that's the way people should be thinking, not just right now, but ongoing. You should have a plan. You
Yeah, I'm ready to be a prepper.
you need to be like the mafia uh, dons who are going into the big restaurant. They always sit with their back to the wall in case the other boys come in to pay them off. And it's kind of that way. You just have to think ahead of, what if something nasty happens? Am I prepared? Do I have food? Do I have you know backup water supplies? Do I have an exit route? And that's one thing they have people do here. And this is a neighborhood that only has two entrances. So if you don't know where the other exit, there's some emergency exits that require you to run through a fence and get onto the Bluebonnet Electric right away and escape. If you don't know where everything is, then you're not prepared for the inevitable disasters we seem to get here in Texas.
Yeah, we were pretty well equipped for this one, except for bottled water. We certainly could have done better there. We had lapsed our supplies somewhat, and in fact, when my son-in-law and I were out driving around trying to find a place where we could buy something, the main thing we wanted to buy was bottled water. We didn't want to drink our um, supply or to drink boiled water if we could get a decent supply of either spring water or purified water. And we did finally catch Costco open. I think this was probably Thursday, and got a case of water. So we actually were okay where water was concerned. And of course, like many people in town, we were stockpiling snow and letting it melt so that we could use it to flush toilets. In fact, one of my major tasks this morning was getting rid of all that water, which was pretty dirty, and it was I mean, we had water in tubs and we had water in buckets,
So
everything we could find to hold water.
are you telling me that you melted Frosty the Snowman? And
Oh, we did indeed.
oh,
Actually, one of our
yeah.
failures was that we did not build a snowman.
Oh,
I
my
don't I don't
failure
know
was
how we
we had no bottled water. This is where my environmental values bit me in the butt, and I stopped buying bottled water, a long time ago, just because of all the things I've read and seen of the floating plastic out there in the Pacific Ocean, and so I stopped buying. Yeah, I have a lot of, you know, permanent containers for water, and I have water filtration systems that it would have been nice to have some of that evil, environmentally unfriendly plastic bottle water.
Indeed, indeed.
That
Well,
was
we were
our
happy
big,
to find some.
yeah, we were really short on water until I got started, boiling. That was fun, standing at the electric oven for hours on end, boiling water.
I actually got pretty worried about you because you were offline, which you never are, and you were offline for at least a couple of days straight. And that's when I actually contacted your sister, and she and I were sharing our worry, sharing our concern. And that was when I was just on the verge of calling the police department near you and asking them to check on you.
I
And
saw
that's
your Facebook
when you
post.
yeah, well, you saw my post and let me know that you were okay just in time.
Yep.
Otherwise, you would have had the police knocking on your door.
Yeah, for the couple of days that I was offline, every day. Well, the great thing, or the sucky thing about the rolling blackouts. If they're only having it on for 15 or 20 minutes at a time, the way the internet works is they have these pesky modems and they run off of electricity. And so, unless you have a big uninterruptible power system to run that, you're pretty much offline. And if you only have 20 minutes of power, that's about how long it takes it to reboot and reestablish a connection to the internet, because that happened constantly. I'd be waiting here, watching my little meter that showed when my internet was back, and it would get back. I would click on something and the power would go off. So that went on for a couple of days, not to mention the fact my iPhone 6, thank you, Apple, is not holding power. It has one of those defective batteries that they claim it doesn't have after. And so that one wouldn't hold any charge. So I was incommunicado, and that is not a relative of the avocado. That is a state of being.
Yeah, our connectivity was out when we woke up on Monday morning, and I think it was back. It came back about the same time the power came back. But I think what happened was that our provider, which is Spectrum, lost power at their facility before we lost power. So I went through a period of time there where I was using my iPhone. We actually had pretty good cell connectivity, so I was using my iPhone as a hotspot for what few things I was able to do online. I didn't really take a lot of. In fact, it was kind of nice to be offline.
Yeah, I noticed that as well. Verizon had outages also. I couldn't even get one bar on the phone when it was alive. And apparently a lot of their cell sites were down. So that was fairly unusual, because in past power outages we've had out here because of thunderstorms and such, I was always able to take the phone, do a hotspot like you were doing, and just keep on working. But it didn't happen. But it was kind of nice being out of communication. I didn't have any reason to go into the studio because the studio is not steam powered, unfortunately. I might have to work on that. I may get a steam powered setup here, but until that happens in an outage, we're out of business.
So, what do you think you're going to do to prepare for the next one?
Same old thing I've always done. Have that emergency stuff. I have a pantry that looks like it's a miniature HEB market. And I try to keep it that way with stuff that doesn't spoil, and just try to keep an eye. The big thing is pay attention to the weather, pay attention to the news. They're not, unlike Tucker Carlson may tell you that they're all a bunch of liars, and that he's the only one you should listen to. But
I don't think Tucker
that's not.
Carlson was very helpful
He's not a
over
good
the
source
last
of
week.
useful disaster information. He's good for causing disasters, but that's another that's another subject for another time. But basically, the people that I've watched on the local media are good people. They're in the same boat as all of us. They have, they may live in a slightly nicer neighborhood, but they still lose power. They still have to drive on the frozen freeways. So there was a lot of great coverage. I enjoyed, when we finally got, TV coverage. They had some good reporters out there just trying to let people know what's going on, because knowledge is one of the basic food groups for me. If you're lacking knowledge, you're in a lot of trouble.
So I suspect there's going to be a lot of political flack around this. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet is that one of our senators decided to flee when he realized his house was getting cold and headed for Cancun, Senator Cruz. And I think that Senator Cruz is going to hear about that for a while.
Yeah, I loved the sign on El Arroyo's uh, famous sign out front, and it said, too cold for you, cruise to Mexico, spelled Cruz. And he has indeed had a rough week since that really bad thing. But Mayor Adler didn't spend a whole lot of time sniping at Cruz because he had a similar kind of faux
Yeah, he had
pas
gone to Cabo during COVID.
after telling everyone you got to stay home, stay masked, stay home, don't leave, don't go traveling. And he heads off to Cabo. It's like, no, Mayor, you go.
I think everybody kind of forgot about COVID this week.
Yep. And speaking of COVID, we still don't have vaccines out here in the rural areas. They'll send out a couple of hundred just to keep people say, well, I got some, and the 30,000 other people that didn't get it just think that's kind of a ridiculous way to be handling the vaccines because they have all these sites set up, but the sites never have vaccines.
Well, apparently the numbers of new COVID cases are going way down nationwide, and there's some talk about whether maybe it's a seasonal illness. Actually, it's not clear exactly why they're going down, but the vaccine may be part of it.
The lack of Donald Trump may be another part of it. People aren't being bombarded on a daily basis about how those masks are just a mistake. You shouldn't be wearing masks. It's unpatriotic, and the
But
communists are going to take over if you wear a mask.
Donald who?
Uh, what? Donald something wore a dead orange cat on his head. I'm already washing that out of my mind.
Donald Trump Jr. seems to think that the governor of Texas is a Democrat.
Yes, he made big points with Abbott on that one. Everyone's going up to the governor going, I didn't know you were a Democrat now. Boy,
I think that Donald Trump Jr. has had his own problems with snow, maybe a little different kind of snow.
yes. Either that or his dad and him do a lot of Adderall together. Yeah, it's that family thing. But that's just speculation. I'm not making any false accusations, just speculating. I'm a speculator.
The family that speeds together.
Does evil deeds together.
Oh boy.
I feel a t-shirt coming on.
Well, what have we missed? We've covered a lot of ground here. Oh yeah, I was going to say that Abbott is going to catch a lot of heat for this, and if you watched him in his news conferences on television, he looked pretty worried. I think he knew that this was going to be on his head, and certainly the leader should take responsibility. It's always kind of nice to come out when you're the leader and say, I'll own this.
Yeah, I
He
haven't
hasn't
heard a
really
lot out of
done that.
haven't heard a lot out of Attorney General Paxton lately. He's keeping a low profile, especially since the guy that he was counting on for a pardon didn't. So there's another person that we won't be hearing a lot of. People are really pissed that he spent so much taxpayer money filing suits that didn't even involve the state of Texas. He's suing other states for their voting practices, and he should look at the local voting practices if he wants to file a suit.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be some, what shall we say, political ferment here in Texas over the next few years. Maybe
Yeah.
a bit of a revision.
Yeah, and people should read Dan Rather's most recent posting. My friend in France, actually, she's now in the Netherlands, forwarded that on Facebook, and the man is a treasure. I mean, he had to evacuate his condo because they had no power and there were water leaks and everything. And he had you know, good observations about how we got into this mess and how we're going to survive it and get out. So I always like to read Dapper Dan's writings.
So how are we going to survive it and get out?
Uh, get rid of idiots. Don't let don't you have a nice Mercedes, brand new. Are you going to give it to your idiot cousin who's drunk half the time and stupid the rest of the time? Or are you going to give it to a licensed driver who has a really good driving record? Yeah, that's not a hard decision. You need to pay attention to these people. Just because they are saying the things that you want to hear doesn't mean they really, plan on doing any of that. And we've learned that from many local politicians. They're easy on the promises, but very short on the deliveries.
It looks like Dan Rather had an emergency preparedness kit.
Yep,
And I think that he describes here in a post what was in his kit.
yeah, that's a good thing to have. I had the, in the Bay Area, we always had an earthquake kit that we kept in the part of the house that was least likely to collapse. So if it did collapse, we at least had stuff, and that included money and food and water and tools. One thing people don't think about is having the proper tools to get yourself out of a bad situation. Things like pry bars and crowbars, and the tool to turn the water on and off
Oh my
at
God,
the
yes.
street. That's one of my most prized possessions that I've
Oh,
had
you have
ever.
one of those.
Absolutely. It makes a big old T-shaped device that has the little proper thing that fits onto the water meter, turns
Oh,
it.
you'll have to tell me where to get one of those because I didn't have one. I had a crescent wrench at ready,
Yeah.
but I wasn't sure that that crescent wrench was going to do the job.
It probably won't because I tried a crescent wrench on that many, many years. That's why I wouldn't purchase the tool. It's like a lot of places that where they have water meters, there's not enough surrounding real estate, from the meter to get in there with anything other than a small crescent wrench, and a small crescent wrench isn't usually going to handle it unless you've been dosing it with WD-40 for for a week.
Let's see. Is that called a water meter key?
Yeah, I believe that's what they called it. I can't remember. It's
Oh,
been so long since I
Oh,
bought
I
it.
see one. Here's a 36-inch solid steel water meter valve key.
That's the one, and
All right.
that's that is one of, and you should have it probably posted right next to the location where your in-house cutoff is. Like at my house, the water meter is probably 40 feet away from the house out by the street. And it comes into the house, into the garage, and there's a pipe coming up, and there's a water valve on there that, it's a very simple on off valve that before the water goes into the water softener and
Yeah, we don't have
house.
anything like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, really important that you have something installed. You know, it's basically like the power strip you want to have on your computer, because that's your power strip to where if something struck, I've had faucets blow up here in the house and water squirting up, and fortunately I could go and immediately turn that off and save the day. But that people should look at their infrastructure and try to figure out if it makes sense. Try to think of all the awful things that could happen: fire, broken water pipes, floods, and you know, Republican politicians showing up at your door. You need to have an escape plan too, but you need to have an emergency plan for just about anything, because otherwise, it's hard to make an emergency plan when you're in the middle of the emergency.
I'm trying to figure out what size water valve key I need to get.
They're usually pretty standard. You should actually well, later on, call Austin Water, Austin Energy, whoever provides your water, and ask
Yeah.
them what size is required. And I'm sure they would be happy to give you that information, because you're one less person they're going to have to come out and rescue when there's a water problem.
I see one here that has multiple, an attachment that has multiple sizes on it.
That is probably that's kind of
That
like
might be a good one to have.
the trailer hitch I have on my pickup truck. Is I it has 3 different ball sizes on it, so you don't have to go and buy a new trailer hitch every time you get a different trailer. So it's the same kind of thing.
A 4-way multifunctional utility key.
That sounds like the plan. So,
Well,
boy,
that's pretty good.
yeah, we're sounding like the guys that used to be on TV with all the fix it and helpful hint programs. That's kind of what we have today.
Not that I'm all that handy. Our friend Brooks Coleman, who we interviewed recently, had issues with his pipes and he just replaced his pipes. And it turns out he hoards all kinds of like plumbing fixtures and is ready for anything, basically.
That sounds like me. I have a storage shed out in the back of the lot here, packed full of everything that I had that was left over from a construction project or a repair project. I have a lot of, PVC, elbows and fittings, and even the glue or the compound you put on the PVC pipe to stick it together. Yeah, because I never throw stuff away, and it always, is a big hassle. And my wife just hates it because I'm a pack rat. But there's always that one thing that you need and you don't have. But if you're a
Yes.
pack rat, you can go and go, there it is. I saved that for 15 years and I finally get to use it.
I should learn to be handy.
Handy. Be
Incidentally,
handy.
you were talking earlier about having a water cutoff inside the house. Apparently, that's very rare in this part of the country.
Really? Really?
Yeah.
Boy,
Yeah.
Bay Area, all of our houses, I mean, that was a key because it was, earthquake country. And you couldn't, take the time to run all the way to the street if you have the cutoff right there, in the house. It's usually just before the water heater and such things. And yeah, that was,
Yeah, I mean, I was looking for one and I saw no sign of one, and I did some research, and basically it's a thing they do in the north
yeah,
very commonly, but not here because
uh,
for the
uh,
same reason that they didn't weatherize
it costs
the
money.
power system. Well, it costs money, and you wouldn't need it in the tropics, right?
Yeah.
It's not always tropical here.
Well, the thing about water systems, you don't need to have a disaster to have a disaster.
It's
There's
true.
stuff gives up the ghost at some point. There's we haven't come up with eternal infrastructure. It's just you build it once and it's there forever. And good luck with that's possible in movies and comic books, but not in real life. So
Yeah.
a good idea to look about. I mean, when I bought this house, first thing I did was grab the blueprints and walk around and go, what is going on with this house? But the people that built it, that I bought the house from, were really, preppers. The guy was a former fighter pilot who was an airline pilot in Houston, and they prepped real good. There's like 50 amp circuits on everything. Each room has a multitude of electrical outlets. I mean, they were planning for everything, and all the infrastructure is like top notch, heavy duty, and that was a big selling point. When I saw that, it's like, yep, I'm going to keep this house, because a lot of the older houses, the ones built in the 70s and 80s in Texas, are starting to get the end of their useful life, because a lot of the things built back then didn't have the benefit of new technology, new building materials that hold up. And I've seen a lot of these houses just falling apart, and that's sad. And a lot of it's due to shoddy building code enforcement. So what else, John? We're coming up on 50 minutes here.
I think that we have covered a lot of ground.
We've covered all sorts of ground and some underground and above ground. I think this will help start some conversations. You know, people should stay in touch with Plutopia. Yeah, I'm sure you have some questions or some observations to make. We weren't the only two people impacted by this storm, so
That's right.
drop by plutopia.io and communicate with us. There's links to every way we have of communicating.
Twitter, Facebook.
We're communication friendly. That's
right on.
That's our bread and our butter.
Okay, well, thanks, Scoop.
And thank you, sir. Give my regards to Austin, and I'll give your regards to all the Jade Helm people that are surrounding my house, because I survived and they didn't. So
right.
Anyway, see you later, Tater.
Okay, talk soon. Bye-bye.
You can follow the Plutopia News Network at plutopia.io. On Facebook, go to @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. With John Lebkowski, I'm Scoop Sweeney. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.